Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. Back in the 1970s, Henry Kissinger developed his famous theory of triangulation, which said that if there are three big powers in the world, the power that manages to get one of the other two to join its camp is going to dominate geopolitics. It was the two versus one syndrome. And in the early 70s, when Nixon visited China, the Americans believed that they'd managed to achieve precisely that, prizing China away from the Soviet Union, offered the hope that that country would then join the global economy, benefit from globalization, modernize. It joined the WTO and would increasingly invest and look to the West for its future. But as we know, that American dream has not come to pass. China has grown richer and has modernized outside the Western rules-based system and shows no proclivity to join it anytime soon. But more worryingly for the West, there are signs now that the old Sino-Soviet alliance from the 1950s, as we used to call it, is making a comeback. Beijing and Moscow are increasingly cooperating, for example, on vaccine diplomacy and trying to undermine the credibility of Western vaccines as they push their own in the Middle East, in Europe, and in Africa. On disinformation campaigns, the Chinese seem to be following the playbook here of Maria Zakharova, the aggressive but sometimes also humorous spokesperson of the Russian Foreign Ministry. They seem to be carrying out coordinated cyber attacks, particularly against recently the European Medicines Agency, looking for a commercial and other intellectual property information. At the UN, they cover each other. The Chinese cover the Russians when it comes to criticism of the treatment of Alexei Navalny, and the Russians stand up for the Chinese when it comes to Uyghurs or Hong Kong or Taiwan. And the Russians increasingly look to China for their arms sales as well. Now, what is driving this rapprochement? Well, on the Russian side, it's clearly energy. The Russians know that they have only 10 years left to sell as much of their oil, gas, and coal as they possibly can, because their economy depends on these sales, before the value of these fossil fuels disappears as we move towards the greener economy. And they can't do this alone by selling energy to Europe, so they have to sell more to China. They hope to increase to 35 billion cubic meters, for instance, in the next decade, the natural gas that they will sell from Siberia to China. And Russia has invested in big pipeline projects, for example, like the Power of Siberia or redirecting the Yamal pipeline in order to do this. Now, some experts are quite happy with this evolution because they argue that, number one, as the pipelines only go in one direction to one place, China will be quickly able to ask Russia for the lowest possible price imaginable, and this will weaken the Russian economy. They also argue that by continuing to sell hydrocarbons, Russia is delaying by another 10 years its necessary modernization, which alone can keep it as a major power in the 21st century. But in the short run, obviously, the fact that these two big powers are working together is not good news for the West. So what should we do about it? Well, I think in the first place, we need to recognize that Europe today still accounts for far more direct foreign investment into Russia than China. Europe sells much higher quality goods than China does. China buys Russian gas, but it doesn't actually invest very much in the Russian economy. And the energy trade is also slightly still in favor of Europe. So Europe has leverage over Russia to make sure that Russia continues to look west as much as it looks east. Now, some allies in NATO, of course, will be a little bit nervous of this attempted Western rapprochement. But as long as NATO secures its defense, we should use the levers that we can as far as possible on the Arctic, on energy cooperation, on direct foreign investment, for instance, on cooperation on regional conflicts, to continue to keep channels of communication open with Russia. What we don't want to see, as some people are worried about at the moment, is, for example, China Chinese troops participating this year in the Zapad military exercise, which Russia conducts on our western borders. It's not in our interest to have a military alliance between these two big powers any more than it was in our interest in the Cold War to see the Sino-Soviet alliance succeeding. Thank you very much for listening and watching this week. Look forward to engaging with you again next week.